Well, hello, folks. My name is Adrienne Whaley. I am the Director of Education and Community Engagement here at the Museum of the American Revolution, and I'm super pleased to have you all with us this afternoon. So what I'm going to do is now transition us from life at sea to, as you may have guessed from my question, life in the archives, which is one of my favorite places to be. And if I had to choose between the archives and the sea, I'd probably choose the archives. I don't know what James Forten would have chosen, but I want to be in a library. So here's what we're going to do. We've got two amazing guests with us this afternoon who are going to talk to us a little bit about women and the archives and about the amazing stories that can be found there, thinking specifically about women of African descent, how that ties into our story about Black founders, the Forten Family of Philadelphia. We're going to start with two presentations, then we're going to bring our guests back on stage for a conversation that includes Q&A with you all. And just like in the first half, I want you to feel very, very welcome to ask your questions. This is really meant to be inclusive. One of the beautiful things about having an intimate group both here and online is that you all can really talk to each other. So I'm very excited for this. So our two guests are Lela Sewell-Williams and Rebecca Shipman. And so let me tell you about each of them. And then first I'm going to invite Lela up, and then I'm going to invite Rebecca up. So Lela was the immediate past curator of the manuscript division within the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center at Howard University. She's now the new, like the very, very new, and this is super exciting, Director of Collections at the National Geographic Society. How neat is that? That's right, congratulations. Now, Lela has a vested interest in the preservation of the history and culture of those of African descent, having served within the archival field for over 25 years. Previous to her time at the Moorland-Spingarn, and she had been there actually before as an assistant curator of manuscripts from 2001 to 2005, she served as the manager of the Columbia, Maryland Archives. During her career, she experienced various privileges, including becoming the first university archivist at her alma mater. How cool is that, to go back to your own school and get to do that? So she did that at South Carolina State University. She also initiated the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture's Hip Hop Archive Project and the Moorland-Spingarn's Black Regional Dance Archives. She also founded an archival consulting firm, Preserve Your Story. But the one privilege that she truly holds very dear and close to her heart is that in 2011, she was appointed to the board to serve as the International Association of Blacks in Dance Archivists, an honor that she still maintains. How cool is that? So after Lela speaks, we're going to be joined by Rebecca Shipman. Now, Rebecca graduated from Howard University with a BFA in art history in 2023. So congratulations. Recent graduate. In the past, Rebecca worked with Gang Gang, is that correct? Yes, Gang Gang, a nonprofit focusing on the visibility of Black artists in the Midwest and in equity in the arts at large. For the past 2 years, Rebecca has been working at the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center in the museum and in the manuscripts department, it's just the coolest thing. Rebecca is the 2022-23 Terra Curatorial Fellow at the Phillips Collection, where she conducts research on underrepresented artists in American modernism. And she'll be continuing her education working towards an MLIS, so a Master's in Library and Information Services at Syracuse University in the fall. So congratulations, and Lela, we're going to start with you and then turn it over to you, Rebecca.
For all my life, I've danced since I was 4 years old, and I always feel like I'm going to step up and fall on my face. Doesn't matter how coordinated I am. Good afternoon. So I'm extremely excited to be here. And I first would like to begin by giving you a little background about Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. So it is recognized as one of the largest repositories and most comprehensive for the documentation of history of the people and culture of African descent. Throughout the Americas, throughout the diaspora. So it was established in 1914 with the donation of Dr. Jesse Moorland's private book donation, and later in 1946 Arthur Spingarn, his private collection was donated in 1946 to Howard University, which ultimately became the Moorland-Spingarn Center. But in 1973, it was actually redesigned or refocused to become a research center under the direction of Dr. Michael Winston, who divided it or organized it into 4 divisions, which is how we exist today, which is the Library Division, the Manuscript Division, University Archives, and the Howard University Museum. One person who I failed to mention, which was crucial, is Dorothy Porter Wesley. Dorothy Porter Wesley served as the librarian from 1930 to ultimately the director of the center to 1973. She was a force to be reckoned with. She was actually the first African-American woman to graduate from Columbia's library school. And at the time, when she came to Howard University in 1930, there was no classification system that really comprehensively spoke about the Black experience. So say, for instance, there's a field, a Dewey Decimal, or the Library of Congress subject headings, which was 400. Anything Black related would go under 400. And she was like, unacceptable. And so she created her own classification system so that whether it's Blacks in the arts, literature, science, math, whatever it may be, we could be categorized correctly. And so that's what she did, and her legacy continues on here at Moorland. Here's my clicker. Is that the clicker? Okay. So as I've already mentioned, we were founded in 1949, but we are the repository for a diversity of personal and professional papers, organizational records, which includes Francis and Archibald Grimke, which I will mention today in my talk, Aline Locke, the father of the Harlem Renaissance, Kwame Nkrumah, Mary Frances Berry, Dr. Benjamin Mays, Mary Baraka. So we go, everything you could think of as it speaks to the global Black experience is what we preserve. And as mentioned here on this slide, our mission is to provide access to history through diverse formats and to preserve it for generations to come. Now, specifically, this is the division as of yesterday that I was directing. Literally yesterday was my last day. And so in 1974, the Manuscript Division was organized into 4 departments: the manuscript, prints and photographs, oral history, and music. And these resources of the Manuscript Division combine to provide important insight into the growth and development of Black families, organizations, institutions, social and religious consciousness, and continuing struggle for civil rights and human justice. So what's so interesting about the Manuscript Division as relates regarding our manuscripts is that we not only collect personal and professional papers, but we are the repository for 100 organizations, which is immense, to say the least, to be a corporate archive for 100 organizations that diversify in size from Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated to Prince Hall Masons to Black sociologists or Black anthropologists. So this is wide range, but it was the goal in supporting or collecting these Black organizational archival records was to really be able to tell a most comprehensive story about the Black experience in different fields. And so we've been able to do that and continue to maintain that process. Now, I'm going to read from the slide because it's just easier. So the theme of this talk really is preserving the legacy of 19th century women through intergenerational accountability. That's my favorite word, intergenerational. Training the next generation of culture keepers, which I have to tell you in the 25, almost 26 years I've been in this field has been one of the most exciting parts of my work, to be able to engage with the next generation and help them to see their own accountability in preserving these legacies. So today, what we're really going to be highlighting are images of photographs and artifacts depicting the representation of African American women in the 19th century. However, the description of these images will be expressed through reflections of Rebecca and myself as we navigated the process of implementing preservation techniques as a tool of accountability towards protecting the narratives recorded through visual and material culture. So this material culture really is anything that consists of physical manifestation of the product of culture. So with this description, I'm not really going to be talking about the visual things that you all will see. I'm not going to give an immense history behind them, but more so what I hope to provide is the passion behind the work and the work and why we do the work. So images and artifacts provide a tangible glimpse into history. So today we'd like to highlight how history is captured through those formats documenting Black women. However, as stated in the slide, not only will we reflect history, but how history is maintained by people of African descent. So if you all have been downstairs, you know who this woman is. Charlotte Forten, of course, is the matriarch of the Forten family, and she, of course, was born in 1785 here in Philadelphia, wife of James Forten, grandmother of Charlotte Forten Grimke. Now, what's so special about this particular image, and I'm going to just call a spade because I really didn't know this until we were approached by the museum, is that this apparently is the only image of her existing, and it's in the repository at Moorland-Spingarn. So really, once again, speaks to the reality of our accountability when we have the only image of somebody. And especially her place in history, her family's legacy. So it really does speak to our accountability as being the repository of a one-of-a-kind image. So there are tens of thousands of artifacts and images like that that are existing in Moorland-Spingarn of people who are forgotten or uncelebrated. Let me qualify that statement as regarding forgotten, uncelebrated. Those who are forgotten and uncelebrated are not forgotten and uncelebrated by the people who preserve their legacy. We know who they are when we celebrate them. Nonetheless, it's really about the larger story and making sure and ensuring that the communities that we represent from the various walks of life are at least promoted in spaces that not necessarily programming, or unless you come to us, you would know about them. So opportunities like this are crucial. So with this said, it's through the preservation and promotions of these legacies that archival and museum professionals are able to align personal and professional missions to celebrate and remember the diversity of history, the diversity in American history. So the following images reflect the sampling of Black women as diverse and whole. All the photographs in this portion, except for one, are preserved within the Francis Grimke papers, which are held at Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. Who is this lovely baby? So this lovely baby is Charlotte Forten Grimke, who was born in 1837 and died in 1914. So she grew up to become an anti-slavery activist, a poet, and educator. She taught for years during the Civil War in South Carolina. Later, she married Francis Grimke, a Presbyterian minister who led a major church in Washington, D.C., and was a board member of Howard University. So this center not only preserves images of the Grimkes, but we also preserve her. We have 5 diaries of Charlotte Forten Grimke, specifically that speak to her time during the Civil War and her interactions with soldiers. In fact, if you were downstairs in the exhibit, one of the diaries from our collection are featured within the exhibit. So this also just gives a multifaceted life experience of this 19th century woman, having this image of her as a baby, having the documents that speak to her personal experiences and her diaries, the work that she did, the legacy that she had in education. It really helps us to appreciate the multidimensional aspect of this woman. So not only does this image depict her as a baby, but it really does also depict who the photographers were. So then it gives you a different or more insight into who was taking this. This photographer was in Boston. Look at that. All right. So it really even gives you greater insight into the time and the people that she was associated with. Portia Marshall Washington Pittman. This is Booker T. Washington's daughter. And so when I came across this, I was floored. And this is on a regular basis at Moorland, that I would open up a box looking for one thing and find something else and just am like stuck for 10 minutes. Like, I don't believe I'm touching this. And this is why I love what I do, right? So she is, like I said, this is Booker T's daughter. She was born in 1883, died in 1978. The fact that she's a part of the Grimke papers, I can only speculate, and I'm speculating, so do not quote me. So my feeling is, okay, so why is her picture in the Grimkes? Well, Booker T spent a lot of time in Washington. The relationships that occurred in the community of people of African descent, it makes sense. Grimke was a part of the Howard board. More than likely, here's a picture of my daughter, keep it in your photo album. I don't know. That's a story I've come up with in my head. But they're really, and there's correspondence from Booker T in Grimke's collection. So more than likely there was that personal association. But Pittman would grow up to become a respected musician, a music educator. She would serve as the chairwoman of the education department at the Texas Association of Negro Musicians. So not only do we have this image of her, right? We also have a book that was written about her entitled Portia, The Life of Portia Washington Pittman, the daughter of Booker T. Washington, which was written by Ruth Ann Stewart. So once again, here we are in this full circle. We have this picture of this little girl, Portia Washington, and then we have a publication that speaks to all of her legacy. So once again, Moorland-Spingarn is in the business of trying to tell the most comprehensive story about people, organizations as well. Once again, not forgotten and not uncelebrated. So this is just like it's depicted here. This is the unidentified woman and her children. So even though it's identified that way, we can still learn a lot there. For instance, the period based on the clothes, as well as the image where it was taken from, this location. Now this one is Charleston, South Carolina. Now if we were to really stop and think and ask ourselves, is this the image of a Black woman that you would think of during that time period in Charleston, South Carolina, knowing the history of America during that era? Is that the first image that would come to mind? I'm just going to leave that one hanging. Another image of an unidentified Black woman taken here in Philadelphia, which depicts a visual, very poised, probably woman of society, of the 19th century. Once again, common thought of that era, maybe not necessarily thinking of a Black woman of that era looking that way. It gives you an opportunity to really stop and think about what are my visions of people of that time, how they were living. It's just another opportunity to really engage in conversations and thoughts about what our perspectives or what our view of history history may be, and just really the holistic view and representation of various generations. Okay, now this is the one picture that is not a part of the Grimke collection. Her name is Sarah Fowler Thompson. Now, is there anything that looks familiar to you with her, except for that she and I have a similar hairstyle? Well, not only does she look familiar to me, it's because that's my great-grandmother. So once again, this is a 19th century Black woman with a very powerful legacy, if I say so myself. So she was not only raised in Pittsburgh in that era, so she was from a free Black family. She was also the wife of Rufus Thompson, who my great-grandfather was one of the first Black caterers in Pittsburgh. And her youngest son, unfortunately, who she died in childbirth, William Thompson, was one of the first Tuskegee Airmen. So this 19th century Black woman, for me, obviously is very personal. It speaks to the multi-dimensional experiences of Black women living and achieving in that time, which I'd like to think I'm trying to carry some legacy of that on. But even during that era when their voices were suppressed or ignored, they would not allow it. They defined their place. They continue to do so in these images and help us to redefine and understand history based upon the terms that they established. So I'd like to thank you so much for your attention to my portion of this discussion. And you stole my thunder because I was going to tell you that she's graduated, but this is Miss Rebecca Shipman.
Okay, hello. I'm very happy to be here today as well. And as was said before, I just graduated with a degree in art history, and I chose to study art history because growing up, I was very book averse. Reading did not come easy to me, and I think and learn in visuals. So just let me get my place really quickly. And so I chose to study art history because it seemed to me to be an opportunity to see culture, history, and really importantly to me, personal narratives and differing perspectives through visuals. As it turns out, to get an art history degree, you actually have to read a lot, which is something that I have figured out and worked with. So by no means, as seen on the screen, I am not book bashing. I really enjoy reading now. But that original idea of visual culture being an alternative avenue for entry for people who, for whatever reason, do not find themselves in books or do not find easy understanding or do not internalize that information well has really stuck with me. And as you can see at the beginning of this program with the performance, that's not an original idea. That's something that museums really bridge the gap between history and the public. And once I was hired to Moorland-Spingarn, that really opened up that idea for me and took it to a whole new level. I've spent most of my time working with our over 2,000 artifacts in the museum collection, but then even in the manuscripts collection, because I'm working under Miss Sewell-Williams, when a collection is donated that's manuscript material, so generally text, there's also sometimes going to be artifacts within that collection, and I get to work with those as well. And then as Miss Sewell-Williams said, and it's a really natural part of this field, is that I came in as an intern to learn the professional practice, but then in addition, just by interacting with the content, I get to learn history as well. But the research is really left up to the authors and the museums. We are more caretakers. And through this experience, I was introduced to not just visual history, but smells and textures and the literal weight of it. And engaging the senses leaves a larger psychological impact for all of us, but then it also opens up avenues for other people to get involved. And in my opinion, it solidifies these histories and makes you aware of the personal histories, or excuse me, personal stories, and makes it undeniable in a way that's not always conveyed through textbooks. And that idea of an undeniable history becomes incredibly important when considering Black history, and then especially Black women's history, who for a very long time has been diminished, if not outright denied. So the act of not just acknowledging but preserving these histories becomes an act of respect to those who went before us in and of itself. And at Moorland-Spingarn, fueled largely by Miss Sewell-Williams' enthusiasm and commitment, I have spent the last 2 years learning the basics of how to become an ethical record keeper. And I'm using that term because we all know a record keeper. There's probably one in your family as fans of history, that you're probably some in this room. And in that familiar context, it can be understood as not just the process of holding on to records, but passing them down through generations. In a museum intern status, record keeping includes measuring artifacts so we know how to properly store them, making condition reports so everyone on staff can be aware if action needs to be taken in order to preserve any of the artifacts. It includes finding provenance and tracking appraisals, values, and other corresponding information so we are aware of what kinds of things we have in our collection. And there's very specific standardized practice to doing all of this work. It includes the way we touch things, and more specifically, what's in between our skin and what we're touching, as well as all the things I previously mentioned. And they are set in place so that, one, internally, we are working under the best practice possible, but then also because of the nature of our field, where this is meant to be shared, it is so that we can easily communicate between institutions. And archival work is actually in comparison, a fairly new field, so it's still evolving. And so when there's a new best practice in place, largely that information is shared between professional networks and professional publications. And speaking of this field being evolving, a lot of the work I'm doing is in fact uploading this onto like a cloud-based website so that everyone has access to this same information. And given the fact that I'm one of many student employees who have a cap on how long we're going to be there, it's a matter of when new people come in, it's searching via a OneDrive or whatever it may be, as opposed to searching through file cabinets to pick up on where the work left off. And the type of work I've been doing serves us internally, as I've said before, so it allows us to have the best care of artifacts. And I'd invite you to return to that idea of personal stories being represented in the archive. And in my experience, often interacting with these artifacts conjures a feeling of caring for someone else's belongings. And I'm echoing Ms. Sewell-Williams here, but I do think that besides the very cut and dry professional practices, part of the practice is a respect for the people you are working with or their legacies that you are working with. And so in the example on the screen, I have Charlotte Forten's diary, which to have access to anyone's diary is a deeply intimate act. And so with diaries, along with all the rest of the artifacts I come in contact with, I really have to approach it with respect. One of my favorite stories from my time at Moorland-Spingarn is when we came across the remnants of a 19th century cultural practice of saving a loved one's hair, and sometimes that would be sewn into artwork or framed. In this case, it was a disjointed braid, which was rather alarming to me. But nonetheless, it's not only evidence of a 19th century cultural practice, but it is also the remnants of a personal relationship of whomever grew the hair and the person who found it so valuable that they entrusted it to an institution to preserve it for several hundred years to come. So it's that kind of personal relationships I'm looking out for in my work. And I'm going to borrow a term or an idea from African art history, which is that African art, unlike European or Western art, is not simply made for aesthetic purposes, but it is rather imbued with the spirit of the person who created it, or lack of a better term, owned it. And so that idea of there's this metaphysical power that's brought to it by the people who, or rather brought into it by the lives lived of the people who came in contact with it, is something that I think about a lot when I'm working in the archive. And then this picture, so the second reason, it's important to create these records that I am, is because when it comes to it, when someone approaches us or an institution approaches Moorland to engage with these histories, we can easily provide them with information and provide them with the desired artifacts eventually. So this picture of Charlotte Forten is the same one that Ms. Sewell-Williams showed you previously, but this is while I was preparing it to be sent to the Museum of American Revolution. And I did the same process of measuring and photographing all of the artifacts that were sent here and packaged them in acid-free containers, which helps so there's no erosion on any of the artifacts. And then I was able to actually hand it over to the Museum of American Revolution staff, who, because we all share these same standardized practices, will care for it in much the same way. And then the other thing I'd like to address is when it comes to my work at Moorland-Spingarn, is there is not an unlimited pool of resources to pull from in order to follow these proper procedures. So here you can see the ruler next to it is meant to show scale, and that's a standard practice when taking archival photos. However, we did not have one available, so this I created out of cardstock tape and a printed off and carefully measured ruler online. And then the other thing this photo exemplifies is the light in the photo. Without any light, that just looks like a metal rectangle, and that's not helpful for our records or the Museum of American Revolutions. And so the best museum or conservation practice when you need to capture details along with no glare is to use a photo box, but without one available, this was the work of a flashlight and some tricky angles. But it does show that regardless of the resources, I mean, and it's not like a dazzling photo by any means, but it does show that I'm meeting my professional quota through my practice. And then the last aspect of my educational experience at Moorland-Spingarn, and what really all this work leads up to, is public engagement with these collections. And I think that's really where the value of this work lies. When you come in, you can find yourself in there, but then you can also make connections between each of the collections, as Ms. Sewell-Williams just exemplified. And this is a photo of me and Ms. Sewell-Williams putting together an exhibit for a history professor at Howard University who was holding a conference on Haitian histories. And people shared with me then, and I think they do feel this way, they're really excited to interact with a facet of history, and often their history, that is unknown to them. And the other part of the accessibility of this that I've previously spoken about is the fact that I'm uploading these records onto the internet in some capacity. And there's specialized software that is created to hold specifically records of measurements and photographs and the things I've previously discussed. And it makes it easy for not only Moorland-Spingarn staff, but intra-university staff, as well as, and to an extent, visitors and researchers when they come in to be aware of what we have in our collection. And in the event of a disaster, such as fire, flood, or et cetera, and as is the nature of the game, we would have our records preserved from physical damage in that way. And so through these interactions where I'm not only interacting with the collections, but allowing the collections to be interacted with, I have been able to see, but also been an actor in the practice of historical information coming to life through multiple forms and through multiple lenses, and thus extending these histories for generations to come. And I'm excited to continue the conversation with all of you. Okay.
So we're just going to do a bit of a quick tech turnover, and then we will get into our conversation. Come on up. I hope you all are thinking about the questions you want to ask. So I'll just wait for my thumbs up, and then we'll get started. All right. How do I sound? Can you all hear me? Good, good? Yes? All right. So the museum was incredibly, incredibly honored and lucky to get to display artifacts about the two Charlotte Fortens downstairs in the Black Founders exhibition. And it's because, in so many ways, of the work that the two women on this stage are doing that we're able to do those sorts of things in an exhibit like the one that we have. So I think where I want to start with you two is just, how did you get into doing this? Like, what motivated you and what continues to motivate you? I feel like, so I'm an educator. You all know I'm the director of education here, and I majored in African American studies in undergrad. And one of the things that motivated me to get into education was being so frustrated and so angered by some of the deeply disappointing stories that I discovered through that I wanted to be a part of the change in American society. I wanted to be one of the people who was working to make sure that we could be a better nation than sometimes we had been in the past. And so I wonder what has motivated you all to get into this preservation work, and what continues to motivate you as you move forward.
So I was telling the story with my table mates that I grew up in a household where history is revered. You know, it was a part of our daily conversations, and one of the stories that I shared is when I was going into undergrad and I identified or chose history as my major, and my father, who is now watching, who I'm sure will fuss at me for this story, he wanted to know, what are you going to do with the history degree? And I was like, but you made me love history, you know. So even though I decided I wasn't going to do the history education, I probably don't have the same temperament as you. I decided I was introduced to archives my junior year of college, and it was just like the world opened up. I did an internship with the State Historic Preservation Office in South Carolina, so we were dealing more with structures, but I did get to do a lot of archival research and learning about what these structures were in South Carolina, specifically African American related structures. And I was amazed that there were people who got paid real money to do this work, and that I could make a career out of organizing people's legacies and having that accountability. And it literally aligned with my personal mission, my love for history and culture, and being of service to that field, being of service to the continuum of my family's love of history. And so that's kind of what took me on the trajectory, is the introduction to the archival field.
I kind of fell into this. I hope I'm not alone in this room when I say prior to working at Moorland-Spingarn, I did not know what an archive was. I was not on my radar at all, but I was encouraged by one of my advisors to apply to the position, and we were off. It really was automatically. I enjoyed everything I was doing, and being that I had already seen my path being in history and in visuals, it really was just very natural. And I know that from an early time in my education, not in my college education, the most interesting part of art history to me was the material culture. One of my favorite artist talks ever was, his last name's Copeland, and he's an art historian, not the artist, but he did a whole essay on the stakes behind the I Am a Man posters, and that they doubled as self-defense if need be. And so to me, that's far more interesting than some paintings I've seen, and so that kind of just came together for me. Yeah.
What do you all wish that people knew about what it means to work in the archives? And then what do you wish that people knew about what it means to be a woman of color working in the archives?
I think that which I was disappointing for me, although I wasn't introduced to archives till I was a junior in college, and the value and how weighted being able to have access to primary research is. And if more people did it earlier, if they were introduced to it earlier, you know, we all go to museums, you know, majority of us when we're younger, and we have that exposure, but like making the connection that you could walk into an institution and put your hands on something, even though a lot of things are digital, because sometimes we don't need to have our fingers on things these days, but just be able to have access that early on, it really can change how you feel or understand certain aspects of history, how you may feel about yourself, how you may feel about your neighbor. I mean, and just the ability to really connect with the tangible aspect of history. But for me, as an African-American woman in this field, there are, you know, we have African-American artists and librarians and museum professionals and archivists, but there's still not an overwhelming amount. So I have a vested interest in ensuring that I'm able to tell these stories with a particular sensitivity and understanding that someone who didn't necessarily have it couldn't do. And so my work at Moorland and being at Howard for almost close to 20 years in different divisions, but Moorland in particular has a very special place for me because I do see myself, right, in the records, but it's not, when it's your experience, and it's not everything, and obviously I can't associate with the medical stuff, and I don't know what I'm looking at with that. The Drew collection we have, and Ernest Just, and things like that. But it's amazing that we have those records and the medical history. And even though I may not understand all of the language and the processes that they were going through, but just knowing like these and continue to be the legacies that speak to all these amazing fields. And it just really speaks to more of the comprehensive history. True, of course, I am an African-American woman, but I'm a person first. And our legacies and our stories, they're all interconnected. So being able to be in a specialized library and have a specialized understanding of African-American or diasporic history, really, and having being a history major, of having a history degree, you can see where you can fill in the gaps, and it makes more sense. And so it's not about being exclusive. It's not about being it's about being able to connect with the records. And so having the experiences that I've had and having a larger understanding of particular aspects of American history in particular, it causes me to feel very accountable, but very privileged. And with that, I want to be able to continue to share in it. And so I'm able to find the joy even when it's a lot of work. Especially because this work is tedious. It can be very tedious. But
how many of you all are researchers? You know how tedious it can be it
can be very tedious. It's like, didn't I look at this correspondence 6 times? It's just, it's a different one, a different day. But with every experience and every box you open is something new, and it's so exciting. And I think that a lot of times, unfortunately, the way people are introduced to history is like super boring, and it's just dates and names, but it's so much more than that. I mean, it's living, and the archives is really living, and that's why we continue to collect. So something that happened yesterday is history. It's still history. And so I think that for me continues to motivate me in this industry to make sure that it's just as comprehensive as possible.
I'm just imagining what it must have been like to have her as your mentor and teacher.
You cannot even imagine. You really can't. It's wonderful. And also, like, how do I even add to that? That was wonderful. No, I do. I want to reiterate. That's something I've run into a lot. Like, trying to tell my fellow college students, like, no, the archive's really fun. And they're like, yeah. But that there really is a wealth of so much knowledge. I just learned so much about literal rocket science, and that in every field there is a place for history, and that we can in fact move forward in a more efficient and ethical and humane way if we are looking back before we move forward. To your second question. Yeah. I mean, I think those two things go together. Like, to be a Black woman in the field of history and to be a Black woman in the field of librarianship takes a fair amount of understanding what came before that and how to move forward in a better light. Yeah.
This is going to be my last question, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody here and everybody who's joining us online. One of my favorite experiences here at the museum happened relatively recently. So you may know, if you've walked through our galleries, that we have a signed first edition printing of Phyllis Wheatley's Book of Poems. And about a month ago, I got to touch it. No. That is one of my favorite experiences in museum collections. What has been a favorite experience for you all handling things, interacting with things at Moorland-Spingarn?
That is such a hard question. That's like, I've had people walk into Moorland and say, "Could you show me something on Black history?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" So most recently, it's interesting because probably about a couple months ago, I was putting something away, like refiling. It's the Cook family, which I believe was a large DC family. And I opened up the box, and I was like, "Oh, what's in this envelope?" Because, you just have to be exploratory. So I opened up the envelope, and I was like, "You gotta be kidding me." So it was a convention pin from was it 1906? Forgive me, historians in the room and on Zoom, but Theodore Roosevelt's presidential inauguration in my hand. I was like, you kidding me? But it was not only impactful that it was in my hand, but there was a Black family there. And I was like, wow, like this, we're talking emancipation, not even a full 50 years before that, and they were at this man's inauguration. And then his relationship with Booker T. Washington, and then I have a picture of Portia. So the connections, specifically at Moorland, because we do have the university archives, and then we do have the manuscripts and the music and the oral histories, but that's just the most immediate. But one of the collections that I processed when I was there the first time, in 2001 to 2005, I did Clarence Cameron White, who was a Renaissance violinist, Harlem Renaissance violinist, but then that was his first career. And then his second, he lived and taught music in DC. So the Schomburg Center has a section that has some of his collection, and we have another part of his collection. So I was reading one of the letters, and it was between, I think, him and Tanner, like Henry O. Tanner, the visual artist. And he basically was, I don't know if Tanner had written him, and he was like, you owe me $5, and you better send me that $5. And I was cracking up, and I was like, wow, okay. So the fact that people are people, we look at people historically, and they're so iconic. It's just like, oh, I'm sure they didn't even sneeze, But like, he was like, you owe me $5, and I'm gonna come and get it from you. So those kind of interactions, which they're funny, but it helps you to appreciate that people were everyday people, and they did some phenomenal things. Like, oh, that is the most recent one. So there was a letter between Romare Bearden and Lois Mailou Jones, and he's telling her, you really need to think about how you're going to approach your artistry. And he's giving her this amazing information, and then he's like criticizing her, but in a very phenomenal way, And so just the people interactions. How do you have a letter from Romare Bearden in your hand between Lois Mailou Jones and Romare Bearden? Like, it's overwhelming, but it just, once again, it's those moments that make me really grounded in knowing that the work I'm doing is it's a fulfilling, but it's a beneficial work. So.
And my favorite one is always, so did you know, I have to set it up like this, that Frederick Douglass wore colored shades, right? He had a blue pair of glasses and a yellow pair of glasses. And you don't know that despite the fact that he is, quote unquote, the most photographed man in American history, because all the photos are in black and white. So it just shows that there are other insights in the archive that if you have read every book, you still don't know until you know. So you gotta come to the archive. Yeah.
Now I'm just imagining him strutting down the street. It's Monday. It's time for my blue shades. I love this. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left, and so I want to open it up. Are there any questions in the audience, either online or here in person?
Yep, great. Here you go. It's me.
I know that we have hundreds of historic societies in this area. Every town has them. But what I'm noticing is a lot of these towns are now getting investments into archive centers above and beyond the historic centers. And I think that's marvelous. They're getting, looking at a town and the town's history and the people who lived in that town, and they're taking things from the archive from people's grandparents and great-grandparents and things that really mark our history. But what strikes me is that we don't write letters anymore. Our pictures are digital. Where are the archivists seeing our future when we don't have a box to open up and come across an old photo, even if we don't know who they are?
So the archival field, and I'll tell you, because my husband's a programmer, and so I was just like paper and pencil girl, and he's all computers. And he was like, you're gonna have to shift. And I was like, no, never me. But I did. So with the collection management program that Rebecca spoke about, We have digital preservation systems. One is called Preservica, where it really does preserve digital content. And it goes, like there's this automated system, don't ask me because I'm still a historian, but it goes in all these technical bells and whistles to make sure things aren't becoming corrupt. So we are able to maintain digital records. We don't, like you said, we don't write letters, but we do email each other to death or tweet and everything else. And so we are able to retain those records through those systems now. So the digital images, we get flash drives and external drives, and there's certain ways that we make sure some things we may print off and have hard copies, but most of the time they're stored in different places to ensure that the digital content is preserved, because there's so many things that are born digital, like they never existed as paper. And even websites, I was just having that conversation about preserving websites. Like there's a whole thing with that. So we are getting it done. It takes a shift, but it's the same processes as far as archives and organizing them and making sure they're available. And so we're dealing with software, yes, and that other piece of it is, technology changes every 10 seconds. So just making sure that we stay ahead of it as much as possible. But there are some large organizations that will remain nameless. Can't say specifically who they are. But they've been very engaged with some of these huge software companies that have conversations with National Archives and Library of Congress, and they talk about what do you all need in order, or they come to the table because they're National Archives, and they're able to have a seat at the table with these big software companies and say, we need to make sure that these records are being preserved. How are we going to do this? What's your software going to look like? Can we talk to your technical people? So these conversations are happening. So please be assured that we're also preserving those records.
Thank you for that. Meg, I want to know, do we have any questions from online first before we come to our room?
Yes, one of them was thinking about 19th century women and how they would scrapbook, create friendship albums. There's also one in the exhibition if you want to go check it out. And that, double-sided Scotch tape is horrifying probably to you guys, but thinking about how people still scrapbook today, do you have any advice about what they should be doing to preserve those photographs from further damage when they're keeping those things of their own family?
Yeah, let's do that question right now, because when the program ends for our friends online, you all will still have access to Lela and Rebecca. So let's take that one. Then we'll wrap up, and then you all can swamp them with more.
So, water and heat, the worst thing ever to photographs and documents. It's not good in your basement, because if there's pipes that break, it's gone. So it's just those basic things like that, making sure that everybody can't go and pay bajillion of dollars, that's a word, bajillion, of dollars for archival storage. But some things like Rubbermaid, very simple. Go to your big box store and buy a Rubbermaid box. Because of what those materials are made out of, they preserve it much longer. But staying away from water and away from heat, things in the attic, it'll be safe. Yeah, but it's 100 million degrees in your attic, so they're not safe. So just reasonable things like that. A lot of the big box stores, because I don't want to advertise for anybody, they do have scrapbooks that are and photo albums that are archival, being they're asset free, so they're not going to deteriorate as quickly, especially if you put it in a Rubbermaid box. And or storage and away from heat and water. So that's basic suggestion.
Great,
right.
thank you.
Wonderful.
I also just want to say, by the way, I've really appreciated having the Charlotte Fortin diary on display. It's been a treasure to be able to talk about it. And it's my personal favorite object, which is a 10-minute talk that we do here at the museum. And it's my favorite object to talk about right now. So just letting you know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. All right, well, I'm going to take this moment to wrap up this conversation and thank both of you so much for sharing your stories, working in the archives, what it's been like for you, your favorite artifacts, and so on and so forth. Can we get a round of applause for Lela Sewell-Williams and Rebecca Shipman? So after this, we're going to have our first guest, Eric J. Dolan. He's still going to be signing books here in Liberty Hall, so you can find him back over there at the table. I also want you to know that you have the opportunity to see the full 25-minute long Meet James Forten performance downstairs on the second floor. That's going to begin at 3:30, so you've got a little bit of time to continue mingling, asking questions before then. Now, there are actually two versions of Meet James Forten. One of them is the younger James Forten that you saw a snippet of just previously in today's session. There's also another version that focuses on elder James Forten, who's looking back at his life, looking back at some of his accomplishments and some of the challenges that he's encountered and thinking about what might be next for him. So an opportunity to see both of those in the same day is going to come up on Saturday, June the 17th, as part of our Juneteenth celebration. So I invite all of you to come back, use your membership to get into the museum for free so that you can see both of those performances together in one day. And then, of course, feel free to check out our website, look at your member minutes when they come through and all of our other communications so that you can see everything else that we have going on with Black founders, the Forten Family of Philadelphia. Thank you all so much for coming out today and for joining us online. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.